My name is Claudia Hoffman, and I'm 30 years old. I was born with nothing but a stubborn will and a mother who could sew silk out of scraps. We lived in a weather-worn cottage at the edge of Millersfield, a southern town where names mattered more than virtue, and dresses were judged by how long they trailed behind you at the Christmas gala. I wasn't born with a trailing dress or a trailing name, but I had dreams, big, bold, foolish dreams, and I had Henry Whitemore. Henry was the eldest son of Judge and Mrs. Everett Whitemore, the reigning monarchs of Millersfield society. Their family had built most of the county, the courthouse, the theater, and most notably, the Millersfield Country Club, a sprawling white-pillared estate where Christmas galas were held, deals were made, and reputations were either born or broken, and somehow despite the distance between his tuxedo world and my flower-dusted kitchen, Henry fell for me, or so I believed. He used to sneak down to my mother's garden, barefoot and boyish, leaving behind the Whitemore estate and its stone silence. He'd knock at our back door, hair muss from carriage rides, and say, "Claudia, marry me before I have to dance with another debutante." I'd laugh, wiping flour from my cheek. Then, "You'd better kneel fast, Henry." I loved him, with the kind of love that hums in your ribs and curls your toes in winter, and for a while, I thought he loved me too. That year, I turned 30. Henry said we'd announce our engagement at the Christmas gala. "Just wait till they see you in red velvet," he said. "You'll outshine them all." My mother worked late into the night sewing the dress. Red velvet, pearl buttons, and a neckline just daring enough to cause whispers. I pressed it myself, polished my shoes, curled my hair by firelight, but the invitation never came. December 24th arrived cold and silent. No carriage, no note, no Henry. I waited until dusk, then walked the long mile to the country club gates. It was lit like a cathedral lantern swaying, violins pouring through the snow like honey. I stood outside in the shadows, clutching my muff, watching women in white satin glide up the steps, watching Henry, arm in arm with Charlotte Worthington, daughter of the governor. He kissed her gloved hand as if he hadn't once begged to kiss mine in secret. A doorman approached me. "Miss, these gates are for guests only." My voice cracked. I'm expected. Name, Claudia Hoffman." He scanned a golden list. His brows lifted just slightly. Then he straightened. "You're not on the registry." His words hit harder than a slap. I turned before he could say more. I walked home in silence, red velvet sticking to my thighs, snow soaking the hem. Inside, Mama looked up from her mending. "You were gone a while," she said gently. I stared at the fire and whispered, "They never meant to invite me. I was just practice." She didn't speak, just pulled me close. Her hands smelled of lavender and thread, and in that moment, something inside me hardened. Not my heart, no, my resolve. They thought they could break me with silence, with exclusion, with elegance, but they had no idea who I would become. The days after Christmas felt quieter than snowfall. Millersfield, always smug in the winter, grew crueler after that night. Whispers followed me in the market. The baker's wife, once friendly, now offered me stale bread with a pitying smile. They all knew I had been publicly deliberately left out. The Christmas gala was sacred in this town. To be banned was to be branded. I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was now something worse, forgotten. But forgetting me would become their greatest mistake. Mama passed away the following spring, pneumonia. Quick and brutal, the red velvet dress still hung in the corner. A relic of a promise broken. As I folded her final dress, stitched from scraps, I made a vow not over her grave, but to myself. If no one will open doors for me, I'll buy the house and remove the walls, with nothing but the coins she left in her sewing jar. I left Millersfield. I arrived in Greystone, a soot-colored town to counties east, where no one knew my name. There, I scrubbed floors at the Granville Hotel, waited tables, and sold firewood. On my nights off, I'd sit by the boiler room light reading investment ledgers and merchant ledgers borrowed from a sympathetic clerk. I was always good with numbers. Didn't care about velvet or last names. Numbers were fair. In 3 years, I worked my way up to bookkeeping. In 5, I managed payroll for one of the most promising mill startups in the South. By 30, I had saved enough to buy shares in that mill. And when the owner fell ill, guess whose name was on the buyout contract? Mine, Claudia Hoffman. Meanwhile, Millersfield stayed just as it had been, stale with tradition, choking on its own legacy. But there was one thing they hadn't expected. The country club, their holy grail of prestige, had fallen into quiet financial ruin. A series of bad loans, unpaid staff, and a dwindling membership had left it bleeding funds. They tried to hide it, of course, but I knew. I had eyes in every county. I waited until winter, when their debts screamed loudest, and then I made the call. "Miss Hoffman?" the broker said, surprised. "You're sure you want to buy the Millersfield Country Club?" "I'm not just sure," I replied. "I've been planning it for 7 years." Silence. Then, a shuffle of papers. "Well, the current owners are desperate. They'll accept $2.8 million if you sign before year's end." I smiled. "I'll sign tonight." I returned to Millersfield in a black carriage. No nameplate, no fanfare. No one recognized me except the doorman at the club gates. He was older now, limping, gray at the temples. "Can I help you, miss?" "Yes," I said, handing him an envelope. "Please give this to the Board of Trustees." He opened it slowly. Inside, a notarized deed with my name. His eyes widened. You bought it?" "I did." "Why?" "Because no one else should feel like I did on Christmas Eve." The country club smelled the same: polished oak floors, cinnamon punch, perfumed arrogance. I walked its halls like a shadow come home and seen by most, but impossible to ignore once noticed. The same crystal chandeliers hung above me. The same piano sat in the corner, collecting dust since no one had the soul to play it the way Mama used to say a person should play, like they've lived. And the boardroom, still oak-paneled, still smug. The trustees, 6 men and 1 woman, all older now, sat in disbelief as I stood before them holding ownership papers. "This is absurd," huffed Mayor Langley. "You can't just buy the club." "I didn't just buy it," I replied. "I bought it last week. You're guests now, and your time is almost up." "What are your intentions?" asked Mrs. Eliza Quayle, the only one who even bothered to look me in the eye. I sat down slowly and smiled. "To dismantle everything you built on exclusion." They didn't speak after that. I could see the panic simmering beneath their pressed collars and pearl brooches. I gave them until New Year's Day to vacate, collect their belongings, and notify the members. I even offered them champagne on the way out, bittersweet justice served chilled. But I wasn't done. The next morning, I met with Reverend Porter, a warm-eyed man with a rusted truck and a heart the size of Georgia. He ran a shelter from a crumbling church basement, always out of room and out of funds. I placed the deed in his hands. "This is yours now," I said. "Well, ours, but mostly yours, Miss Hoffman." He blinked. "Are you sure? They used to turn people away here for not wearing gloves," I said. "Let's use it to welcome people who don't even have shoes." Within weeks, carpenters arrived. We ripped out the bar and replaced it with a pantry. The ballroom became a dining hall. The billiards room, once off limits to staff, was turned into dormitories. I kept the chandeliers not for elegance, but as a reminder, even cruelty can light a room if rewired right. I paid every worker fair wages, hired single mothers, struggling fathers, orphaned boys who once delivered firewood in the snowboys. Like I had been, long ago. Word spread. Tea first, Millersfield sneered. "She's ruining tradition," they said. Then came the frost, a blizzard hit hard, and the town's heating failed. Their own pipes froze. Their precious church doors jammed shut with ice. And guess who opened theirs? We did. For the first time. The elites of Millersfield, fur coats, leather boots, trembling hands, entered the same halls they once guarded like thrones. This time, they stood in line behind children, beggars, and mothers with patched shawls. I greeted each one with a warm plate and a warmer smile, even Henry Whitemore, whose lips turned to stone when he saw me. "Claudia," he said softly. I handed him a bowl of stew. "Everyone's welcome here, Mr. Whitemore," I said. "Even ghosts from Christmas past." Henry didn't say a word after I handed him that bowl of stew. He simply took it, nodded once, and walked to the long table where a family of 7 was already eating. For the first time, the man who once dined by chandeliers was sharing a table with people who knew the meaning of hunger, and I stood back and watched the warmth of humility melt the pride that had once sealed this town shut. I won't lie and say it didn't feel good. There was a thrill in every flinch I saw from Millersfield's elites, every uncomfortable glance, every silenced whisper. They'd all looked down on me, banished me from their rituals, mocked Mama's dressmaking, and dismissed me as poor Claudia from the cottage by the creek. Now they walked beneath chandeliers. I owned and dined in a hall rebuilt with my hands, but revenge, I learned, is like fire. It can warm you for a while, but if you stand too close, it scars. The night after the blizzard, as most guests settled into the shelter's dormitories, I stood alone in the main hall. The snow had quieted. All you could hear was the soft clink of dishes, children's laughter in distant rooms, and the creak of old floors settling into their new purpose. Henry stood by the doorway, hesitating like a boy who'd knocked at my back door once. "Why? Are you really doing this, Claudia?" he asked. "Because you and your kind thought kindness had a dress code," I replied. "You were always more than this town gave you credit for, and you were less than I gave you credit for," I said quietly. He didn't argue, just nodded. "You deserved better than what I did to you," and he left. No grand apology, no begging, just truth. It didn't undo the past, but it didn't have to, because the past no longer ruled me. Days passed, then weeks. Winter melted into spring, and with it came new faces to the shelter: runaways, widows, veterans, boys who had fought wars only to return to empty porches. Each came with their own scars, and I welcomed them all. Some townsfolk still refused to acknowledge the change. They held private parties in their parlors, clutching their pearls and whispering that the town was slipping. But most began to see what Millersfield could become if it learned to care instead of judge. One afternoon, while unpacking crates of donations, I came across a box labeled Gala Decor 1908. Inside were golden ornaments, silk ribbons, and a cracked guest book with names written in looping cursive. The bottom of the page, scratched out so roughly the parchment had torn, was my name, Claudia Hoffman. I ran my fingers over it slowly. Once, it would have made me cry. Now, it made me smile. That Christmas, I held a new kind of gala. No gowns, no pearls, no exclusion, just long tables lined with food, chairs for everyone, candles flickering in mason jars, and music played by a boy with a banjo and a woman who used to scrub floors. We called it the Gathering of Grace, and just before dessert, I stood on the old staircase and looked down at the crowd below, laughing, singing, toasting. I didn't give a speech. I didn't need to. They knew. As the warm light of the Gathering of Grace shimmered across the old club walls, I looked out over a sea of faces, most of whom, just a year before, would never have crossed this threshold. There were no pearls. No bouty eyes, but there were worn hands clasped in prayer before eating. There were children giggling under candlelight. There were strangers who had become a community. We served pot roast and sweet potatoes, fresh pies made by a group of widows from the edge of town. And laughter flowed easier than champagne ever had in the real galas. After dinner, a few folks took to singing carols. Off-key, yes, but full of soul. Silent Night never sounded so true. Even the mayor's brother came quietly, humbly bringing a crate of canned goods. He stayed near the back, but he clapped after every song. The same back door I'd once been turned away from was now wide open. The country club was no longer theirs. It was everyone's. The next morning, I was washing dishes when a young girl approached me. Her dress was frayed, her braids uneven, but her eyes were bright. "Are you the lady who owns the whole house?" she asked. I chuckled. "I suppose I am. Mama says rich folks never care about people like us." I knelt beside her. "Your mama isn't wrong," I said gently, "but I'm not rich because I have money. I'm rich because I remember what it felt like to be invisible." A few nights later, I received a letter in delicate handwriting. It was from Charlotte Worthington. Yes, that Charlotte, Henry's old flame. "Dear Miss Hoffman, I hear you've turned the club into something meaningful. I was cruel once when I could have been kind. I hope you'll allow me to visit, not as a guest, but as a volunteer. Sincerely, Charlotte." I read it twice, then again, and then I set it down and laughed, truly laughed for the first time in a decade. The shelter began receiving donations from nearby towns. People were drawn to the story, how the finest building in Millersfield had become its beating heart. I used the funds to open a small school wing upstairs. Some called it foolish. Charity doesn't last, but I knew better. What doesn't last is status. What lasts is legacy. Henry wrote me too. Eventually, "Claudia, I was young and stupid. I followed what was easy, not what was right. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you found peace." I didn't write back. Some ghosts belong in the past, but I forgave him quietly, not for him, for me. Because carrying bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. That winter, the old club, once a palace of exclusion, became the safest place in 3 counties, and I wore the red velvet dress Mama made me. The one with pearl buttons and a stitched heart in the lining. It fit better than ever. The red velvet dress wasn't perfect. The seams were uneven in some places. One of the pearl buttons dangled loosely at the collar. And yet, when I looked at myself in the mirror that Christmas morning, it felt like armor, not the kind forged in iron but in memory. In pain, in love, in something deeper than silk. I wore it proudly. That year, the Millersfield Gazette ran a feature on the woman who changed the town. They asked for my photograph. I refused. Take a picture of the shelter instead, I said. My story is stitched into every wall there. They asked about my fortune. It was never about the money, I said. It was about reminding this town what it forgot. A week after the story was published, volunteers began arriving from all over: carpenters, nurses, teachers, even former members of the country club who once wouldn't greet me in the street. They didn't come with apologies. They came with tools, and that was enough. One morning, a woman named Eleanor Pike, once the hostess of the very gala I was banned from, stood beside me in the shelter's kitchen, peeling potatoes. "I was awful to you," she said without looking up. "Yes," I answered, slicing carrots. "But you didn't hold it against me." "Oh, I held it," I said with a smile. "I just set it down before it turned into something worse." We didn't talk about it again, but every Sunday after that, she brought pies. I began hosting monthly community dinners. No invitations, no dress codes, no locked doors. People came from across counties: farmers, tailors, war veterans, and children too young to know that the building they laughed in once stood for exclusion. We served food, we shared music, and I watched as the town that once turned its back on me began to kneel in prayer together. One evening, during a particularly cold March, a carriage pulled up. Out stepped Charlotte Worthington, dressed in wool and humility. She didn't come with pomp or apology, just a bag of books and a willingness to teach. She stayed for 3 weeks, giving reading lessons to girls in the West Wing. One night, I asked her, "Why now?" She replied, "Because you reminded me of what I should have become." I nodded. "And you reminded me of what I overcame." Forgiveness was never my mission. Redirection was. I didn't want them to like me. I wanted them to learn, and they did. By the time Easter arrived, the club, now officially renamed the Haven House, had expanded to include a library, a nurse's station, and an art room. Mama would have loved the art room. Children painted angels on the same walls where once only oil portraits of aristocrats had hung. They painted joy over judgment, hope over history. I stood in that room one evening, watching a little boy named Jeremy draw a giant tree with snowflakes falling around it. "Why snow in spring?" I asked. "Because Christmas here never ends," he said, and just like that, I wept. Jeremy's words echoed through me long after he scampered off with his crayon box. Because Christmas here never ends. How could he have known that? For years, I'd wished I could erase one particular Christmas from my life, the one where I was cast out, humiliated, labeled unworthy of a glittering celebration. Yet now, in these same walls, Christmas had been reborn as something more sacred, more honest, a spirit of belonging that lingered long past snow. Each month brought new faces, new names. Some arrived hungry, others arrived haunted, but all were greeted with open arms. There were no velvet ropes at the doors of Haven House, no bouncers dressed in pretense. Only kindness, only warmth. I started keeping a journal, not for publication, but for me. To remember the laughter, the tears, the rebirths. To remind myself that healing is never loud. It moves like a whisper through crowded rooms. One rainy afternoon, I found Henry again, not in a letter, not in a memory, but standing quietly in the chapel-turned library, reading to a blind man. I almost didn't recognize him at first. No fine coat, no pomp. Just a humble cardigan and a heart perhaps finally softened by time. He looked up, saw me, nodded. "Is there a place for men like me here?" he asked. "There's a place for everyone," I replied. He didn't speak again, but he came back every Thursday after that, reading books and sharing bread. That spring, Mayor Langley, once the loudest voice calling me a social climber with no pedigree, stood at the dedication of Haven House's new clinic. He cleared his throat nervously before cutting the ribbon. It seems Miss Hoffman has given us more than a shelter. She's given us a second chance." Applause followed. I stood at the back, smiling, not because I wanted the mayor's approval, but because the town had finally learned how to clap for the right things. As Haven House grew, I started receiving invitations from across the state. "Come speak at our schools," they said. "Tell your story," they said, but I didn't go, because this wasn't my story anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd been told they weren't enough, and now had a place to prove otherwise. One summer night, I walked through the old ballroom barefoot, trailing my fingers along the walls, where once only whispers of judgment lived. Children now played tag there, laughter now echoed where silence used to suffocate, and in that moment, I realized something. I hadn't just changed a building. I'd rewritten the very soul of Millersfield. A few weeks later, a girl knocked at our kitchen door. She was thin, wild-eyed, barely 16. Her name was June, abandoned by kin, nowhere to go. I brought her inside, gave her soup, and showed her to the same bed I once used when I first bought the club and slept there, alone, wondering if revenge would be enough to fill the ache. "Is this a real place?" June asked. "It's the most real place I know," I told her. She smiled like she'd never done that before, and I knew she'd stay. June's arrival reminded me of myself in so many ways, defiant but hollow-eyed, brave but brittle. I watched her from the corner of the chapel one evening, tracing the edges of the stained glass window, the light catching her fingers like tiny embers. She'd never seen anything so bright, she said. "Is this yours?" she asked. "No," I said gently. "It's yours now too." That was the beauty of Haven House. It never asked who you were, only who you wanted to become. Each wall had absorbed so much: my fury, my fire, my quiet rebuilding. But now, it radiated something far better than revenge: legacy. We kept a guest book by the entrance, not of members like the club used to have, but of stories. Each page filled with little notes. "This bed saved my baby. First real meal. In 3 days, I sang again for the first time since my brother died. Thank you, Claudia." I remembered who I am. Henry had now become part of the rhythm. He helped tend the vegetable garden behind the old dance hall, and on Sundays, he sat with June during reading hour. No one questioned it. People change, and when they truly want to, they show you, not tell you. The town had stopped calling me that poor Hoffman girl. Now they called me Miss Claudia, with respect so soft it no longer mattered where it came from. That summer, we painted a mural across the ballroom wall. It began with a girl in red velvet, standing outside in the snow. By the end, she stood at the center of a long table surrounded by children, lanterns, animals, and laughter. We let every child leave their handprint on the bottom, even mine. One night, I stood out on the porch, watching fireflies blink against the dusk. June came and leaned beside me. "What happens when you leave here?" she asked. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her. "No. I mean when a person's ready. When their heart doesn't hurt all the time anymore." That question settled on me like dew. "Then," I said, "they carry this place with them, and they build something new, just like it." She nodded, understanding more than most grown folks ever do. Later that year, the town council voted to officially recognize Haven House as a historic community refuge. They gave me a medal. I accepted it only after making them promise to give 24 beds new quilts. I didn't want glory. I wanted warmth. In my journal that night, I wrote, "They banned me from their party, so I built my own table with more chairs than they ever dreamed of." When Christmas returned again, the second year since my banishment, we decorated the hall with red ribbons, pine cones, and hand-knit stars made by the children. We didn't hang a guest list. We hung names of those we'd helped. Hundreds. June sang "O Holy Night," off-key, unpolished, but when she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. That Christmas night, as I stood beneath the chandelier, they never removed its crystals, still casting fractured stars across the walls. I thought about how far I'd come. 2 years ago, they locked me out of this room, told me my name didn't carry weight, told me there was no place for a girl like me at their table. Now the same room echoed with songs, stories, and footsteps of those who had once been invisible. I had not broken down the door to enter. I had bought the entire house. At one point during the celebration, an elderly man approached me. I recognized him instantly: Judge Aldridge, one of the founding members of the country club, and the man who once stood at the entrance turning away my mother when she asked if her daughter could volunteer. "Miss Hoffman," he said, removing his hat. I came to ask your forgiveness. I studied him, surprised by the tremor in his voice. You don't need my forgiveness, I said slowly. You need to forgive yourself and find someone else to help next. He nodded, tears catching in his lashes. Thank you for not becoming bitter. I smiled gently. Oh, I did. But bitterness doesn't stay warm in winter. Purpose does. That night, I passed by the old trophy room. All the golden plaques and polished shields had been boxed up long ago, replaced now by hand-painted drawings, tiny shoes on a donation wall, letters of gratitude tacked to corkboards. The old club glory had become something far nobler, a living monument to second chances. I caught June in the library an hour later, reading aloud to a boy who hadn't spoken a word into months. She was wearing the red velvet dress, my old one, the one Mama made. It looked better on her. You're the new lady of the house now, I whispered from the doorway. She grinned. No, I'm just keeping your story going. We had rescued over 200 people by that second Christmas. Families, widows, veterans, runaways, lost souls. Each of them left behind a part of themselves, a picture, a note, a recipe, a lesson. The shelter wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who walked through its doors. And though I still kept Henry's letters tucked away, I never answered them. That part of my life had closed its door. Not in anger, in peace. He'd moved on, I heard, started a small repair shop out west. Maybe he learned something too. Before midnight, as snow began to fall again, I climbed the stairs to the rooftop of the shelter. The town lay below, quiet, blanketed, shining with lanterns placed on doorsteps by children who once had no doors of their own. I exhaled, a breath of completion. Let them have their parties, I whispered to the night. I'll keep building homes. 3 winters had passed since the day I walked through the grand gates of that country club, not as a guest, not even as a member, but as its new owner. In the years since, Haven House had become more than I ever imagined. A sanctuary, a movement, a mirror for the town to see itself, flawed, but capable of change. And I had become something no gala, no golden invitation, no velvet dress could ever grant me. It was Christmas Eve again, the kind that coats the earth in a hush. Even the wind seemed to walk softer. June was decorating gingerbread cookies with a group of girls near the hearth. Henry had sent a small envelope, no return address, containing only a clipping from a Bible. I will repay you for the years the locusts have eaten. Joel 2. 25. I smiled. Quiet, forgiven. Around dusk, I walked alone through each room. The ballroom glowed with handmade garlands. The old bar now served cocoa and buttermilk pies. In the courtyard, someone had built a snow angel family, big ones, little ones, even one with wings spread wide. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. This was not the climax. It was the legacy. The entrance. I lit the lantern Mama had once kept by our old cottage door. It flickered orange and warm, drawing people like a lighthouse does the lost. And then, something curious happened. A knock, not on the door but on my shoulder. Miss Hoffman? Said a young girl in a threadbare coat. Her eyes shone like 2 lanterns of their own. Yes? Can we stay here tonight? Behind her stood a woman and a boy. Cold, quiet, waiting. I held the door wide. Not just tonight, I said. As long as you need. We dined that night on stew and warm bread. We read stories aloud. We danced badly. At one point, June grabbed my hand and pulled me into the middle of the room. You never got your Christmas dance, she said. No, I laughed. I got something better. We twirled until we both fell laughing into chairs, and just like that, the girl who was once banned from the Christmas Gala hosted her own every year thereafter. Reflections. I never sought revenge in the way people think. Yes, I was hurt. Yes, I was humiliated. But I didn't need to destroy them. I needed to prove them wrong and build something stronger in the process. And I did. Today, if you ever find yourself in Miller's Field, follow the sound of laughter past the snowy fences. Look for the old club with wreaths on every window and no locks on the doors. That's Haven House, and we're still here. Always will be. Questions to reflect on. What do you think Claudia gained that was more powerful than revenge? Was the town truly changed, or did Claudia simply create something beyond its reach? What would you have done in her place? Subscribe to more revenge stories. Share, like, comment.